from a struggling company that was almost sold for next to nothing to the world's largest streaming service. In the summer of 1998, two people showed up at the Amazon office in Seattle, USA. The meeting with them was personally conducted by Jeff Bezos. He made his guests a generous offer, $15 million for control of their company. The offer looked very tempting, especially since the business of the two partners living in California had only been operating for 2 months. Each of them could have walked out of Bezos' office a millionaire, making a good profit from their idea. But to Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph, the idea seemed too brilliant to give in to Bezos' temptation. The risk was great. If Amazon, with all its resources, entered the same market, Hastings and Randolph's venture would most likely come to an end. On the flight back home, the founders of the company, which could have been known as Replay, made their final decision. It wasn't time yet. They needed to try to make it on their own. 26 years later, Amazon is indeed their direct competitor, but only as the junior one. Netflix, the company founded by Hastings and Randolph, has become a business behemoth, the world's most popular streaming service, the undisputed market leader with a valuation of $270 billion and hundreds of millions of subscribers. And this giant has repeatedly found itself on the brink of collapse, but survived. The idea was born in cars. Both Hastings and Randolph were typical representatives of the class that had already formed in Silicon Valley. They were born into fairly wealthy families and received a good private education. Reed Hastings ran a successful company called Pure Software. It developed advanced software that detected bugs in the computer code of other Silicon Valley companies. Mark Randolph worked for him as the marketing director. But their lifestyle was democratic. No expensive suits, just jeans and t-shirts. Even the future founders of Netflix commuted to work together, taking turns driving each other's cars. And during these daily rides, they talked not only about current tasks, but also about what they would like to do in the future. They were inspired by the example of Amazon, which had already become a successful online store, but at that time only sold books. The format and future of such platforms seemed endlessly promising to them. All that remained was to decide on a product that could be sold in the same way. They were searching for a product that was both universally popular and compact enough for easy shipping. While books seemed like a perfect fit for this model, that specific niche had already been firmly claimed by Jeff Bezos. The ultimate revelation finally came to them while they were standing inside a Blockbuster video rental store. At the time, this was the largest chain of its kind in the United States, with billions in annual turnover, yet it was also notorious among its customers for its draconian penalties and the high late fees charged to rule violators. One day, Reed Hastings returned the Apollo 13 movie cassette late. The late fee was $40. That amount is unpleasant even today. The frustration over the lost money, which Hastings shared with Randolph during yet another trip, sparked an idea. What if they sold video products? But not video cassettes. They seemed too heavy and fragile for mailing. The future partners became interested in the DVD format, which was still rare but gaining popularity. In 1997, to bring their idea of online DVD sales to life, the partners founded Netflix. How did the name come about? They needed something that consisted of 2 syllables. The first would reference the internet and the second had to relate to movies. What could Netflix have been called if circumstances had turned out differently? Among the ideas were Replay.com and eFlix. But in the end, the founders and their closest associates chose Netflix. Net stands for network, and Flix is slang for movies. Network movies, that's how the streaming service's name could be translated into Russian. It took half a year to develop the software and the website. Netflix.com launched in April 1998. Essentially, it was an online rental website, very basic by today's standards, but offering almost the entire range of DVDs released at that time. You could choose from 925 titles, mostly older films. That was Netflix's very first film library. On the very first day, visitors crashed the site. The team, which at that time consisted of 30 people, had to urgently buy new computers to handle the load. Was the launch successful? By the time the clock struck midnight on that first day, 100 individual orders had already been placed for a total of 500 discs. Over the course of the next 4 months, 20,000 DVDs were systematically sent out from and then returned back to the storage facility located within a cramped office in the small California town of Scotts Valley. During this impressive period of growth, the monthly profits for the business successfully reached the milestone of $100,000. The idea really worked, and even caught the interest of Bezos. Just 2 months after Netflix launched, Bezos invited Hastings and Randolph to visit him in Seattle. By the summer of 1998, Amazon was still a very young company as well. It was only 4 years old. At that time, the future internet giant had only 600 employees. Its turnover hadn't even reached $100 million, but the company had already gone public. Investors were demanding aggressive expansion of the business into other market segments beyond books. So what did Bezos do? He tried to acquire a ready-made solution for DVDs by offering about $15 million for Netflix. Not bad for a 2-month-old company. If Netflix had been a typical startup, most likely its founders would have agreed, cashed out, bought new houses, gone traveling, and started thinking about a new startup. But Bezos was turned down. Was Hastings and Randolph's decision risky? Of course. They understood that sooner or later Amazon would get into the same business. And Netflix was barely staying afloat. On the one hand, things were going fairly well. The new video format was popular, but the costs turned out to be high as well. The company was making almost no profit. There was also a threat from another potential competitor, the very same Blockbuster, the leader in the offline rental market, which once mercilessly fined Reed Hastings $40 just because he returned a tape a couple of days late. What was the most important task? To use the temporary advantage over potential competitors to capture as much market share as possible. For that, outside funding was needed. Netflix's own funds were not enough. One of the company's early investors was the Frenchman Bernard Arnault. He is the world's largest dealer in luxury goods, and it's no coincidence that he eventually became the richest person in the world. At the beginning of 1999, the owner of the LVMH group gave Netflix $30 million. The founders raised over $100 million more from various venture investors. What did they spend it on? Netflix began to expand aggressively, which was reflected in its financial statements. Hundreds of thousands of Americans were already using the service, but the company ended 1999 with a loss of $29 million. Nevertheless, Hastings and Reed looked to the year 2000 with optimism. Their plans included going public and raising additional funds for development, and that was when the returns were supposed to start coming in. But trouble came from where they least expected it. In March of 2000, the dot-com bubble burst, and potential investors began to avoid any internet companies like the plague. Netflix found itself on the brink of collapse. The investor funds they had raised were running out, and the company couldn't find new ones. They had to take a desperate step. In September 2000, Hastings and Randolph went hat in hand to Blockbuster CEO John Antioco and offered to sell Netflix for $50 million. Was it a difficult decision? That is absolutely correct. It was Blockbuster that the founders of Netflix feared and disliked the most. The bosses at Blockbuster were arrogant, condescending, and didn't consider you a worthy competitor. At the beginning of the 2000s, the turnover of the company with its vast video rental network reached $4.5 billion. Netflix could only boast of millions. But the founders of Netflix had something the bosses at Blockbuster didn't: the ability to foresee the future. So why did they turn to people who at best treated them condescendingly? Hastings and Randolph, finding themselves in a difficult situation, proposed an alliance. To expand to the national and then international level, they needed money, which Blockbuster had, but most importantly, they needed access to the network's existing customer base, 20 million Americans who actively visited the company's stores. In turn, Netflix was ready to offer a progressive digital format for interacting with customers, proven solutions, and well-developed technologies. The head of Blockbuster simply laughed at Hastings and Randolph. The hysteria around dot-coms is completely overblown, he declared, and refused to pay $50 million. This was probably one of the loudest missed business opportunities in history. A colossal business mistake. And what was the result? Just 10 years later, Blockbuster, burdened with $1 billion in debt, declared bankruptcy. Meanwhile, Netflix went through an extremely difficult period after the rejection. The company's losses for the year 2000 amounted to $57 million. It was forced to cut expenses to a minimum, laying off a third of its employees. But the rapidly expanding and widespread popularity of the DVD format successfully rescued the service. And by May 2002, Netflix officially went public, raising $82.5 million from its IPO. The number of subscribers surpassed 1 million. As a result of the IPO, the company's market capitalization reached $500 million. Demand for DVDs continued to grow. The main content producers, Hollywood studios, finally recognized viewers' tastes and began actively releasing everything in this format, from their classic films to the latest releases. TV companies started doing the same. How did this affect Netflix? By 2005, its film library had grown to 35,000 titles. The company was sending out 1 million discs per day to its subscribers. In 2003, the service reported its first major profit of $6.5 million on a turnover of $272 million. In 2004, these figures reached 49 million and 500 million respectively. The dot-com bubble was finally forgotten by both investors, and Netflix found itself among the main beneficiaries of the renewed trend. By the summer of 2005, the company already had over 4 million subscribers, and its market capitalization reached another important milestone. Despite the successful growth of the DVD business, around the same time, Netflix's management realized that it was under threat. Broadband internet access was becoming increasingly widespread in the country. It was clear that its penetration would continue to grow and data transfer speeds would increase. Netflix had no intention of repeating the experience of the cumbersome, sluggish Blockbuster. Blockbuster rested on its laurels and failed to respond to the challenges of the times in a timely manner. Young and daring competitors simply devoured it. So, what was the company's solution? Initially, it involved developing a special device that would serve as a movie storage unit. Downloading each movie still took several hours, and the company's subscribers could use the receiver to do this, for example, at night. The right choice was made thanks to the experience of YouTube, which was gaining popularity. It became clear that even despite the relatively slow speed, consumers preferred streaming video. That's how the idea of streaming was born. A Netflix subscriber, after paying the subscription fee, gained access to the content collection on the company's website. They could use it on a desktop computer, a laptop, and in the future, as the company hoped, even on a TV. Netflix, as a streaming service, was born in January 2007. Even within the company itself, they still didn't realize what a revolution they had created. The previous such revolution happened with the advent of television. And now, half a century later, the way people consume video content has fundamentally changed once again. At first, Netflix provided access to about 1,000 films, but over the next 3 years, it spent hundreds of millions of dollars buying rights from TV and film companies for their content. Content producers were giving it away for cheap, not realizing how popular streaming would become. But what was Netflix's real wisdom? By acquiring a diverse range of content, it offered this to its subscribers for a symbolic fee and in unlimited quantities. All of this coincided with a severe financial crisis in the United States. People started to save money and suddenly realized that now they didn't need to go to movie theaters, rent DVDs, or buy subscriptions to cable TV channels. All this content could be accessed in one place, on the Netflix.com website, for just a few dollars a month. In 5 years, by 2010, the company's market capitalization increased tenfold. What were Netflix's next winning moves? There were two of them. First, the service began its international expansion. That same year, 2010, it entered the Canadian market. Next, streaming services were officially launched in Latin American countries. In 2012, the service finally made its way across Europe. This was a tremendous leap in audience numbers. By 2016, Netflix was available almost worldwide, with a few rare exceptions, the largest of which was China. The second step was producing its own original content. It required significant investment, but it allowed the company not to depend on the moods and appetites of rights holders. The main consumer became hooked on a constant stream of new releases that couldn't be found anywhere else. The first Netflix original was the now iconic series House of Cards. The company ultimately invested $100 million in it, but never regretted it. And this was just the beginning of a tsunami of original content. The first season of House of Cards was released in 2013. By 2016, the year that Netflix finally became a truly global streaming service, it premiered a staggering 126 original films or series, live action, animated, or documentaries. So, what exactly happened next? What followed was relentless expansion. Geographically, further expansion was no longer possible, so the service focused on diversifying its product range, just as it once grew its vast DVD rental collection to tens of thousands of titles. In 2018 alone, Netflix spent a staggering $8 billion on producing its own original content. Even the largest media corporations could not afford such massive expenditures. Moreover, the company did not have any side businesses, unlike many of its competitors in the streaming industry. Many established content producers and tech giants launched their own versions of Netflix, acknowledging its correctness and the revolutionary shift in public taste. Hulu, Disney+, Amazon Prime, Apple TV+, HBO Max, Peacock, and Paramount Plus all appeared. But none of them could spend as much on themselves as Netflix could, because in each case, the owners of these services also had interests in other areas of business. These other interests diverted their attention and resources. Netflix was the only streaming service that could spend the revenue from hundreds of millions of subscribers solely on itself. It could afford to buy the best talent from around the world. And what was the result? In 2021, Netflix received 36 Oscar nominations, more than any film studio. That same year, it also won 36 Emmy Awards, the television equivalent of the Oscars. During the global coronavirus pandemic, the number of subscribers grew at a record pace. Everyone stayed home and watched Netflix. The absolute peak of success came in September 2021 with the release of the hit series Squid Game, which broke all previous viewership records. That made the subsequent crisis all the more unexpected. In the spring of 2022, Netflix announced for the first time in its history a drop in subscribers by as many as 200,000 people at once. Moreover, they stated that by mid-year they could lose another 2 million users. Investors were shocked to learn that out of the service's 222 million subscribers, about 100 million share their password with other people. As a result, another 100 million people around the world used the service illegally. Within a few months, the company's shares fell by 70%. Everyone unanimously decided that, amid growing competition, the era of unquestioned streaming dominance was over. What was Netflix's response? How do you deal with those who illegally share their service password? Allow them to do so for a small fee. What should be done about the outflow of users dissatisfied with the increased subscription price? Come up with a budget version that requires watching ads and also collect money from advertisers? And what about subscribers who are tired of movies and TV? Netflix now offers games and live sports events. Netflix once again overcame another crisis. The spring of 2022, when the company's value hit its lowest point, is already forgotten. The number of subscribers has exceeded 260 million people. As a bonus, their own theatrical performances and offline shows based on original content. And in 2023, Netflix finally and completely shut down the divisions that handle DVD rentals. The business the company once started with has been laid to rest for good. For all subscribers who didn't manage to return their discs, the service simply gave them as a gift. The company's market capitalization has almost returned to its record levels of November 2021. Netflix is now valued at nearly $270 billion. The company's rapid comeback surprised people even more than its sudden plunge into the abyss 2 years ago. The skeptics have been defeated. Investors are impressed. Bezos is biting his elbows.